so viele Folders. Also ich gehe immer mal durch und dann manchmal gebe ich einer Sache einen neuen Namen und dann muss ich mal suchen, wo ist denn das jetzt? Well, I studied art in Berlin with Patrick and Thiel, so that was painting. But towards the end of my studies, I already started integrating some media. I took a video class and I was interested in integrating slides or 8mm film. And then after I finished my studies in Berlin, I got a DAAD graduate study grant in the US, in New York. And I made my master's there. I studied combined media, but combined media then meant something very different than what it would mean today. But it already went into the idea of bringing media together, of working across media or integrating different kinds of media. And after that, after the master's, I got a Whitney Museum grant, but that was also still mainly for painting, but it got me in touch with some other people. They had very interesting speakers like Philip Glass and so on. And then after that, I had to ask myself, no video, no grant, no money, what now? So I thought, how can I start earning some money, earning my living? And computer graphics had just started, and I had subscribed to a magazine that was talking about all these advances. And then I saw there was a course offered, but it was in Salt Lake City of all places, and it started in 3 days. This was like Friday, the course started Monday, and I had almost no money, but I called them and they said, well, since we cannot sell the place, we can give it to you for half price. So I just did it without knowing so much more about it or who actually would offer work, who has machines, because even in the US they were still rare. So I did that course. It was a great introduction. And then I found out that nobody in New York or in New Jersey or in the near area needed anybody because it was still very rare, and they all had sent 2 people to this course and they didn't need any more than 2 at the time. So it turned out there was a job available in Toronto and one in Munich. And I said, well, you know, I should really try this Munich people. Why don't they reply to me? And it turned out they didn't reply to me because they were crazy busy. And so next thing I went to Munich. That was January 86. And the company was called Roman Kuhn and Partner. Was someone who had very early on understood the potential of computer graphics for television, for advertising, and so on. And they had an office at ARRI company in Munich, and later ARRI bought them. And I needed to work for a company because renting a studio and doing work at these machines was like, it started maybe at 1,000 marks, euros, dollars per hour and more. I mean, it was fantasy price, but it was that expensive. The machine was $350,000. It needed its own refrigeration AC unit. It needed all kinds of peripherals. The room was like 3 million. So nobody could work on it unless they worked in those companies. So I asked the companies, like, I love working there, but please allow me to work on these machines for free at nights, on weekends. And that's what I did. And I made several smaller videos, but I made one huge production, and that was Amphitryon. Together with a theater director, we thought it up how to combine these areas, and it was important to me to pick a classical topic that's accepted as a theme, and that goes against the stereotype that computer animation was always sci-fi or some aliens, otherworldly stuff that didn't interest me in the slightest. But Kleist Amphitryon also combines so-called otherworldly themes, because we're talking about the Greek gods interfering with the humans on the earth. So I put all the topics of the gods were in computer animation and were integrated into video, and the actors were on the stage and sort of, you know, dependent on the whims and moods of the Greek gods. And I think that worked very well, and ARRI really supported it. We could use all their equipment for free. They let us use their huge studio for 2 weeks or 10 days for the audience. And then the problem was, it was so expensive to do this. We got also a big video wall from a company for free in exchange for, you know, they could use my piece for their own advertisement. But it took a long time to put that together financially, and it couldn't be repeated. The Ars Electronica was interested in the piece, but when I told them what it costs to stage it in Linz, they had to say no. So that was too bad, but it was absolutely interesting piece. It was really, if I can say that, I think ahead of its time. And this was 1987 that we did that. And sort of the god is overwhelming, the media is overwhelming the poor human on the stage. So the graphics, the background is 3D, you can see, and then you see coming up the graphics. They were all pre-produced to be played along with a live performance. It's coming up. Another part where there's a lot of intersection between acting and video and 3D animation, 2D animation. So you see a back projection where this 3D corner is going in. It has the images of Zeus and her real husband on it that she still is confusing. She thinks Zeus is her husband, which of course Zeus is known to impersonate people. And so this is now the entrance of Zeus and his entrance onto the stage. And this was pre-produced with blue screen. At first this 3D animation and then Zeus himself. While I was at ARRI, towards the end at ARRI, I also had the chance to work with Alexander Kluge, and I did one of his title sequences and some sort of small experiments that was really interesting. And after that, in March or so, 88, 88, I went back to New York and worked there at different post-production houses, and all the time I kept teaching, like one class here or there. For instance, at Pratt Institute in the graduate program, they had just started having 3D computers. They had the Alias system, and the company Alias donated, I think, like 7 or 8 machines to them because they also wanted to see that students come out of programs that can actually use these machines. So they had an agreement with them, but then they needed somebody who can actually teach it. So I was one of those people, and it was a very interesting time because none of the students had any ideas about computer animation. They came from all kinds of areas. They came from architecture, from sculpture, from fine arts, from graphic design, even psychology or anything. So you had a very interesting mix, all the different backgrounds that the graduate students brought into the program, and new ideas. So it was really interesting. The problem was everything took a really long time to render, and nobody had any machines at home. That didn't exist. No personal computer basically wasn't there yet, and if there were, you could type on it, but you couldn't make any images. So towards the end of the semester, you couldn't even get a time slot at 3 o'clock in the morning to work on these. But everybody it was a very enthusiastic and forward-looking time. In these sort of enthusiastic times and learning times, when one innovation was chasing the other. One was constantly learning new softwares, new additions to the software. And since I was doing commercial work during the day and my own work at night or on the weekends, sometimes I would just be in the studios like 100 hours a week or so. There was almost no time for something else. But for a while I could do that, but I was always like a fixed freelancer. So I had some guaranteed hours, but my typical hours per week were like 60, 80, and so on. And in Munich, that was a full-time job. But in 1 year, I had 6 months of overtime. That was sort of, work. But work and art and was all the same. So one benefited the other. And I learned a lot through commercial work in terms of being efficient and learning all these tools and so on. And then slowly in the early 90s, I think 91, I started using, I had my first Macintosh, my first Apple computer. But that was really for black and white masks, for typography. I mean, one font on the Quantel Henry and Henry, I don't think I talked about Quantel yet, I will, cost like $2,500. And so, of course, once you could use typography on the Mac, you would design it there and then import the black and white and do all the further work in the box. So Quantel, yes, that was very important because I noticed that I started with 3D animation, but that I'm not maybe the best person for 3D animation because it does require, or it more and more required a mathematical and a programming mindset that I don't really have. I was more interested in concepts and in design and in compositing. So I collage layers together. So rather than, let's say, making a 15-minute short film, I would make something that is 30 seconds, 90 seconds, 2 minutes, 3 minutes, but it had a lot of vertical layers. So it wasn't long, but a lot of layers on top of each other. So you have maybe video in the background. Underneath it, you have a background that you created in this Quantel Paintbox or Quantel Harry and Henry that were at the time the broadcast standard. They don't really exist anymore. In fact, I'm just in an exhibition celebrating the 50th birthday of Quantel. I wasn't involved 50 years ago, but I was involved since 86. So, and they were able, after the Paintbox, you had the moving video, and the moving video was just long enough for a 30-second commercial. That was sort of the background. You had 30 seconds of memory for your video, another 30 seconds for a layer of, some transparent overlay, and another 30 seconds for another thing, let's say typography or so. So you had 1.5 minutes of room in there, and after 1.5 minutes, you had to play it out, and then you had to play it back in, and you had to meticulously keep track of where all your media was, because you could only store such a limited amount inside the computer, but it could do it in real time. That was a sensation at the time. That didn't exist. So Quantel is a British company. I don't even know if they exist, but nobody uses that anymore because instead of 300,000, we're now paying 2,000 for our Macs, and it can do 10 times as much as the Quantel could at the time. But the Quantel set the stage. That was before Adobe even existed. And even Adobe was a different company, bought up another company and made that into After Effects later. So, and it was really interesting to see all these different stages of development and to see all the different additions that had to come and at what difficulty it was to combine all the video, to bring it together, and to also, we had to constantly use some workarounds to figure out how do I do this. Today, you have a plugin and it's relatively easy. Too easy maybe sometimes. That was that time. And I worked as a fixed freelancer because I wanted to have my freedom to do my own artwork and to travel, but sometimes the commercial work would just take over. But I always taught at least one class. I taught 1 or 2 classes at Pratt and then later at School of Visual Arts. And I thought it was important to also convey all this experience to students. And I also really liked these different steps that media took. And I thought students should appreciate all the different, the history of this new medium, because it already had a short history. And then I had 2 children, and commercial work can be very unforgiving if you cannot be there. It's like, please show me your baby pictures, but don't tell me you have to stay home. No, this has to be on air. You have to be here. I don't care if your child has a fever, you know. And so it was very difficult. And America, as everybody knows, isn't exactly a haven for like social programs and so on. So next thing is, when I had children, I became independent, and I didn't work for studios anymore, or just rarely. But I did work for like 2 years. I shared a job that was a great way at HBO with somebody else. We just said, you know, one works 2 days, one works 3 days, and we always fill in for each other. That was really a very innovative way to hire somebody, and that worked perfectly. But I started having my own video graphics company, because at the time, you know, I bought my first Mac with Photoshop 2.0 and so on, and I could do some graphics and some work that way. And then my then already husband started a video editing company, so we worked together, and that way I could tailor my hours a little bit better to needs of, I don't know, picking up kids from school or something like that. And I tried to get my own artwork back, to do my own artwork. Of course, doing all these things parallel, that was sometimes difficult. So I decided I didn't really want to work commercially anymore, and some of the commercials were really senseless, and I thought, you know, I don't feel good supporting this kind of waste, this kind of consumption. That was the beginning of my involvement with sustainability, with environmental topics, and I thought I cannot in good conscience help sell this junk. And so I was looking to not just teach one class, but to find a full-time teaching job. And I thought, I have so much history and so much experience in this that is completely uninteresting for a commercial client. They just want to know, how fast can you do this? How fast can you do my job? How good can you do my job? They're not interested in what people did 5 years ago or 10 years ago, but I was interested in that. So eventually I wound up, since 2003, I've been working at NYU as a full-time professor, first assistant associate, now I'm full professor. And I'm running it's not called a chair, but it's basically like a chair position of my degree, and that's called Digital Communications and Media, our degree, not mine. Yeah, that is sort of the trajectory that I took, and most importantly, working at the university allowed me to get back to my art. So in a way it went full circle, starting out with art and experimenting with computer animation, working commercially because that was the only way I could get access to the equipment, the only way I could learn how to use this. And then in the end, you know, having time for my own work, because I teach and I do my own artwork, but I don't work commercially anymore. And I can tell a little bit more about projects that I'm working on now. Das habe ich, glaube ich, auch als Video. Moment. Alles frühe Sachen. Das war eine 3D-Animation, habe ich noch gar nichts von erzählt. I already mentioned that I'm interested in environmental topics, and at some point I thought I cannot make some la pour la development, but that interest also has to be reflected in my work. I'm not a scientist. I cannot contribute to any scientific information about climate change, but especially in America, I think the biggest problem is communication. So why do people not believe it? Why do people not read those articles or listen to scientists? And so I'm thinking that as an artist or also as designers, my students, they can contribute to maybe put another angle onto climate change and try to communicate the topic in slightly different ways and a different form of storytelling, and hopefully interest some people or convey the urgency or have people engage. At the very minimum, have my students be engaged, and then they again can influence others. So I call this series Engaged Media. I work with that topic, with that umbrella term in mind, and I also teach a class every year in Engaged Media that is sort of built around Earth Day in April and so on. And we try to, the idea is not to work on global topics, because for students especially, if you're trying to change ExxonMobil in 3 months in one semester, that is an exercise in frustration and in doomsday scrolling and in negativity. So I try to pick a local topic, something small, where you can actually make a difference and see a difference in the course of a semester. For instance, we did one project on the plastic bottle use of NYU cafeterias. So they went there, they researched how many bottles do you buy, how many bottles are used in 1 week, many bottles are used in a semester. And at that time, you know, everybody who got a meal automatically got a plastic bottle with it. And to be honest, they were already thinking that should probably change, but I think my students' project helped accelerate that and change that. And at the time, Second Life was a huge thing. It was one of the first virtual worlds. I don't know if anyone remembers Second Life. But it was like an empty piece of grass, and you could build anything that you could imagine that fit into the, you know, some of the technical limitations that Second Life had. So we built a scale model of, for instance, a skyscraper of 1 week of bottle use. And if you see that, you know, see a whole skyscraper made out of plastic bottle cases, I mean, texture mapped onto it, of course, that visualizes the enormity of that. Then we made a whole labyrinth that you had to go through with various links, and in the end you can get a virtual t-shirt, stuff like that. But it was fun, and it helped visualize the problem and look at the enormity of it, of only one university. And, you know, my students said, I can never touch a plastic bottle again and not think of our project and think of what we're doing here. Of course, we watch documentaries and so also. And so we did several projects in that kind of mindset, from encouraging people to use not plastic bottles, and NYU has a lot of water fountains. You can always refill your bottle. And so we did a variety of projects with those kind of local situations in mind, that then when you see, oh, that's successful, then maybe you can address a larger issue. And of course, you can also do things like sign petitions or go on demonstrations. But it was important to me to do a hands-on visual project that uses the power of that medium, not to sell you things you don't need, but to convey a message that's important. So that's the teaching part of that. On my art part, I was looking at different forms of storytelling. I have used some short animations, for instance, in one project called Less, which means that was an installation in a gallery, but it was also a Facebook project, and the installation consisted of a lot of letters, each one of them with a little object in there, because I thought I cannot tell people to use less and consume less and point my finger at them, so maybe I should start with myself. So I looked at all the little things that I have, little things that would fit in an envelope. So I put like around 100 or 120 envelopes on a wall, and asked with a QR code, and I asked people to pick one envelope, to snip it off and take a picture of that, post it on Facebook, and promise, because they're taking one of my items, to forego one of their purchases. Let's say, you know, I'm taking a bracelet from Mechthild, and I will not buy the next t-shirt that I don't really need. Of course, I have no way of knowing if they really did that, but it had a pretty good resonance. And then when the wall was pretty much empty, I would refill it with maybe some more envelopes, and I made a short video with it. And I have a, let me see, I have a business card. And that business card is actually oversized. If you see a regular card, it's like this. So the idea is the card is about 10% too big. If you trim the card by 10% and you trim your own consumption by 10%, we're well on our way. So things like that. And so I try to go across different media in my installations. And one of the things I did was also work on Google Earth. And I like maps, and I like working with mapping, and I like telling a story on a map, using stations on a map to sort of tell a story. The first project I did there was Involuntary Journeys, and that was a project I did on, I spent a month on Lesbos during the height of the refugee crisis in 2017. Of course, you can ask, what does that have to do with the environment? But I think social problems also interest me. But the main thing is that many people didn't see that the refugee crisis is actually part of the climate crisis. If you trace back the problems in Syria, you see that they had a 10-year drought, that people who had a regular farm with some farm animals and so on, they were digging wells that went deeper and deeper, and then the aquifers were empty. Then they had to give up their farms, or they had to sell their animals, slaughter them, because there was no more water for them. So you had a whole group of young people that grew up thinking, yeah, we're like middle class, we're farmers, we have our works life ahead of us. All of a sudden, they were unemployable youths in the city joining other dissatisfied, unemployable youths. And then, of course, they're looking for jobs, they're looking for culprits. And if extremist groups come and say, it's their fault, it's very easy for them to believe that. Or if they think, okay, I have no job, but this extremist group, I don't care what they say, but they're giving me $2,000 to sign up. That's a fortune. Of course, I do that so I can help my parents. So it's a chain reaction. It's a domino effect, where the climate crisis was maybe one of the initial crises. And that's why I think the migration crisis is a big part of the climate crisis. And in fact, we've seen only the beginnings of it. If we think we have a problem now, wait 10 years. When we don't have water from glaciers, when the farmers downstream of the glaciers cannot plant anything, when the drought is getting bigger, and the countries with high birth rates cannot feed any of their children. So then we have a real problem. And so to me, all these things are connected, and I like to take the sort of wider view, not say, oh, we have some refugees here, that is terrible, and we can help 5 or 5,000 of them, but look, it's like, where's this coming from? And it's really, really urgent that all of us in all our different professions contribute to the solution. And it's of course difficult. I also live here. I took an airplane to come to Berlin. That's a problem. But, you know, we have to see, well, if I fly, then what can I do in exchange? Let's say I don't have a car, or I don't eat meat. Is that great? No, it would be greater if I don't fly at all. It's difficult to be perfect, but I think building up the conscience and trying to reduce where you can and then widen your reduction. That is sort of what I'm hoping for, what I'm hoping to achieve with my projects and with my own work. So in Voluntary Journeys, I was tracing, I have a blog with maybe 20 or 30 stories, and then I traced two of the paths of refugees, one from Myanmar all the way to Lesbos, the other one from Syria. And in effect, I'm still in touch with a person from Myanmar. We just spoke on Facebook yesterday. It's a wonderful young man, but a bit stuck in Greece, and he's learning English, he's getting his high school diploma, and so on. So for this project, I work on Google Earth, because on Google Earth I experimented and I found a way to also collage and layer painterly objects and typography directly into the map, into parts of the map. So here, for instance, I was tracing the path of Khairul, the Myanmar refugee or Rohingya refugee, and I can layer these paintings on top. And I also have typography that goes in there. So, and you can, as a user, go in there, or let's say if I go someplace else, I can just jump to another path, and this shows you the arduous path of somebody going there, where you have to go, what you have to do to even get there, and the various trials. I have the Athens. So you can see, for instance, how I use typography here. So I can layer typography and Photoshop elements on top of Google Earth and zoom in there. And I like working with that, but in my latest project, I'm running into some problems, because my latest project, after this refugee project, I discovered the Jewish refugees in the 1930s and 40s that had to flee to Shanghai, because Shanghai was a harbor that you didn't need a visa to get there. All you needed was a ship passage. And about 20,000 people went there, so I'm just flying over there. 20,000 Jewish refugees were there, and the connection to the other project, the Syrian, or the project on Lesbos, was the empathy. And of course, the Jewish refugees coming here completely not knowing anything about Shanghai, not knowing, and being stranded there mostly without any means, had another side to it, and that side were the Chinese people who lived there. This was a very impoverished part of Shanghai, and it was already overpopulated with their own people. It was then the Japanese Civil War. The Japanese caused a civil war or contributed to the civil war in China, and pushed a whole wave of refugees from the north, from Manchuria down to Shanghai. So the civil war between the different Chinese factions, on top of it the Japanese, and then there were the various colonial powers. They completely overpowered Shanghai. But the Chinese, there is not a single mention of hatred, of negativity, of saying we don't have room for you, we have nothing to eat ourselves, we cannot accommodate you, you are strangers from Europe, why don't you go back home? So all these things that you hear today in our rich countries, that basically saying no, you can't come here, I'm not saying it is one-to-one comparable. I know that it's different when you talk about 20,000 and when you talk about 1 or 2 or 3 million, but there is a comparison in humanity, in openness, in empathy, and that was my connecting point to this. The other connecting point, of course, is that this is the generation of my grandparents where that happened, and I think it is important not to forget that, and not to look at it only as history, but as how are we living today. I cannot turn back and change what happened during the Nazi period, during the the refugees came after Kristallnacht mainly, so 38, 39 until 41, when all the frontiers actually closed. But I can look at what's happening today and look at my responsibility today. So to me, art and my work and a message and my own understanding of me, my understanding of me as a social person, as a political person, as an environmental person, as an artistic person, they all blend into one. And that's why you hear so many different topics. And I try to merge that all. It is not always easy. I think the hardest part for me is to see how does my project look artistically, that it's interesting from an aesthetic point of view and maybe innovative in the way I use some of the media. At the same time, how can I get my message across without being too agitprop, in your face political and lose maybe an artistic value? So I think that is my biggest challenge, between delivering a message but not being too placative, I don't even know if it's an English word, and maintaining an artistic integrity. But I don't want to make artwork that is just beautiful. I enjoy just beautiful art, but I feel it's my responsibility to use my knowledge and my media for something. And even, I'm not changing the world, but if I change 20 people, 30 people, 2,000 people, that would be wonderful.